Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Executive. My name is Councillor Paul Follows, and I'm the Leader of the Council and Chairman of the Executive. Item 1, apologies. Fiona, apologies for absence. Mind.
Thank you, Leader. I've had apologies from Councillor Peter Clark, Tony Fairclough and Paul Rivers.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 2, meeting minutes of the meeting on the 6th of June 2023 as published on the website. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much indeed. Declarations, Fiona.
No declarations received.
Any further from the floor this evening? None. Excellent. Okay, questions from members of the public. We have one question from a member of the public, which is from Libby Routh, who is the chair of the Friends of Farnham Park. Libby's on Zoom, so I think he's going to read her question and Councillor Williams will then respond. So Fiona. Welcome, Libby. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Please can Waverley give a clear-cut statement on their position regarding supposedly permissive cycling in Farnham Park and provide documentation as to where and when this position was reached, and provide a formal statement of the position regarding the historic bylaws. Bylaws state that a person shall not, except in the exercise of any lawful right or privilege, ride any bicycle, tricycle or other similar machine in any part of the pleasure ground. This and the rest of the bylaws were still in place and quoted in the management plan for Farnham Park in 1995. However, by 2010, the updated management plan states cycling is permitted formally on footpath 98 and informally elsewhere in the park, as long as there is no conflict with other users or site integrity. We can find no documentary evidence of this policy change. Various other wording on permissive cycling has been used since. The stated primary purpose of the park is for recreation, as well as being a sensitive local nature reserve. And it is used primarily by families with small children, pushchairs, dogs, toys, etc. And hence there are conflicts between cyclists and these users, particularly on the steep paths. The supposed permission on permissive cycling is being used to promote the idea of these paths as dual use, and this is increasing potential conflicts. But over the past 10 years, the Friends of Farnham Park have been unable to get clarity from the council on this issue. There are some sections of flatter routes in the park where we'd be happy to discuss permissive cycling, as already allowed on footpath 98. But this must be on the basis of demonstrated need, for example, to provide a direct route to schools rather than for leisure cyclists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams, I invite you to respond.
Thank you very much, Libby, for your question. Farnham Park is a special place for history and wildlife. Its importance is recognised nationally, and it is listed as a site of nature conservation importance, historic landscape value, a Grade 2 listed historic park and garden, English heritage designation, and a local nature reserve. Our Green Spaces team works hard to maintain and manage the site for wildlife, recreation and leisure, and it's received a green flag status for the 4th year running. There are a number of bylaws relating to pleasure grounds or green spaces across the Waverley area, which encompass not only cycling, but relate to other users and to protect the area so that it is a place for all to enjoy. For the benefit of others not aware, they are effectively local legislation to deal with local issues. Cyclists have no legal right to use footpaths. However, they are able to cycle on them wherever the landowner agrees. Any legal proceedings by the landowner, where appropriate, would be by way of a civil action for trespass. However, given that the council has permitted the public over the years to ride on certain footpaths in the park, no civil action for trespass can be taken. A bylaw made by Surrey County Council in 1933 banning cycling on footpath 98 and footpath 151 through Farnham Park was repealed by the Local Government Act in 1972, and so this bylaw is no longer in force. Bylaw 5, paragraph 2 of the bylaws for pleasure grounds, which includes Farnham Park, came into force on the 1st of June 1965. This confirms, among other matters, that, and I quote, "a person shall not, except in the exercise of any lawful right or privilege, ride any bicycle, tricycle, or other similar machine in any part of the pleasure ground." Now, it's the council's position that as we have allowed cyclists to ride in the park on a permissive basis over the years, and even reinforced that by creating shared paths, then a lawful right or privilege has been created for the public to use these paths for cycling. Therefore, it would be inappropriate to bring any action for a breach of this bylaw. The council is supportive of responsible cycling in Farnham Park and providing a healthy, safe and traffic-free route to and from Farnham Town Centre, and our position is that cycling in the park is and will continue to be permitted. So in summary, we have over the years permitted certain public footpaths on our land to be used for cycling, and it would not now be possible to bring a civil action for trespass in our landowning capacity, nor a criminal action for breach of the bylaws. And that's a position that's been reached organically over many years with no specific decision made for this on any particular date by the council. As an organisation, we feel that this current position fully respects the many different users of the park and their need to use and travel through the park. We do, however, expect all users to be respectful to other users whilst going about their recreation, travelling to and from work, school, shopping, or shopping in the local area. While there are some users that sadly do not respect this concept, the incidences of these are very few and far between overall, despite the substandard widths of the park, of paths in the park, and should not be used to single out one particular group as being at fault. The Thames Basin Heaths Partnership, who the council have worked with on the provision of the Farnham Park, sang support responsible cycling, and while their main focus is on dogs, they do advocate safe, accessible spaces for all park users. And the original bylaws for the park did not only focus on cycling, they also considered pedestrians damaging vegetation, making new desire lines through the woods, meadows, etc., among other matters regarding use of the park. The council has not enforced these bylaws either. Now, we are currently planning and considering an upgrade and widening to the path, the Hale Trail, to assist all users of the park. As part of these plans, there will be consultation, and we would welcome further input into these plans as they develop and come forward from all parks users and stakeholder groups. Surrey County Council has already started working during June on upgrading footpath number 151 in the park to improve the footpath network, and we will follow and monitor behaviour of users on the upgraded path with interest as a result of these works. And we will, of course, continue to monitor activities in the whole park of all users, not just cyclists, to ensure that fair balance of behaviour is maintained and respect is kept between all parties. I hope that provides clarity on the position. Apologies for the length of the response, and do feel free to address any further questions on the Green Spaces team, who would be pleased to assist. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I assume that's been provided in writing as well, because obviously that was a fairly lengthy one. Yeah.
It certainly can be provided in writing, yeah.
Libby, I don't know if you've got any follow-up that you want to ask now, but just to renew Councillor Williams' offer, if there's if you need to have a meeting with us or our officers in regards to Farnham Park, please feel free. And obviously that will be responded to in writing as well. Did you have anything you wanted to add at this point?
I think just at this stage, there's two quick points that one is it would be interesting to understand how the council proposes to monitor behaviour, because that's certainly not done at the moment on any sort of formal basis. But the other one, that the issue that gets neglected in the sort of the permissiveness of this nature is the steepness of certain parts of the paths, and however wide they are, they will be inappropriate for dual use. And at some point we need to get a policy in place that recognises that if it is that steep, then however wide it is, there will always be conflicts between cyclists and pedestrians. And I think that's what concerns an awful lot of the park users.
So I think in a few of those cases, we probably need to have that discussion as part of the LC WIP process, the local cycling walking infrastructure plan. Steve, did you want to just come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I think there are fair points that are raised, and I think we do need to actually have that discussion, preferably in the park, with yourself and any other users of the park. And you know, quite rightly, you point out the difficulties of monitoring use, and obviously we are reliant on local residents and communication from local residents to support that. So so in short, yes, let's continue this conversation offline.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, moving then on to item 5, questions from members. Fiona?
None received.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving then on to item 6, a few quick updates from me. I'm sure other members will cover it, but I do want to just quickly say thank you to the leisure team, particularly Tamsin and her colleagues, who arranged the opening under the new contract of the 4 leisure centres over the course of Saturday. I managed to get to 3 of them, and so everything but Farnham, and they were all excellent. I think it was an excellent day, and with a lot of good things done throughout the day. On the subject of leisure as well, Councillor Merryweather and I have been dealing with a number of issues relating to the Edge Leisure Centre, the second leisure centre in Hazelmere. There'll be a statement to the Farnham Herald that's going out this evening on that subject, and Cllr and I are meeting with the Mayor and Deputy Mayor of Hazelmere, along with the Hazelmere Town Clerk, tomorrow after lunch, where there'll be more updates on that coming forward. And then just to warn you all in advance, that we have, for all of the votes coming up this evening, turned on the electronic voting system for the first time in at least about 18 months. We're going to see if in this relatively controlled and civilized environment of the executive, we can get it to work. I do want to thank Kim and Fiona and Victoria and your son Sebastian for your patience in trying to get the thing to work. We hope that it will work effectively over the course of the evening, and if it does, we will attempt to bring it back into force for roll call votes at full council in order to speed up business going forward. That being said, I shall now move on to executive portfolio holder updates. If you haven't got any, please do yield your time, starting with Councillor Keel.
No update this time, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Merryweather.
I'm happy to yield as well.
Councillor Merryweather.
I just want to reiterate what you said about the leisure centres, that they did a wonderful job, and we had a great turnout with Mark Foster and Colin Jackson, now part of the EastEnders television thing, so they were flocked to see him. So yes, and thank you, Tamsin, and everybody who's been involved in that. It was really good. And yes, the Edge is something which is going to be sorted out hopefully tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you, Kika. Councillor Palmer.
I yield.
Thank you very much. Councillor Townsend.
I haven't got an update. I will be introducing obviously the item on the local plan later on. Thank you, Leader.
Yes, I imagine that will definitely generate some discussion. Councillor Williams.
And I too will yield. Thank you.
well, I'm sure this will set a horrendous precedent for yielding across the board almost in perpetuity. But moving then on to item 7, the recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I think considering that the one particular agenda, the recommendation in 4 parts relate almost 100% one-to-one with the local plan update that follows it, I'm going to actually take that as part of item 8. In which case I shall move on to item 8, which is the update of the local plan. Councillor Townsend to introduce, and I have one speaker following that on the Zoom, Councillor Hyman, if he's with us.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I'd like to thank the ONS Committee for considering the local plan part 1 review report and for their recommendations as well. I can assure the committee that their recommendations as outlined on page 3 of the agenda, which are numbers 2 to 6, will be an integral part of the work programme for the plan update. It is critical that we assess local housing need and present an appropriate and achievable housing strategy, whilst acknowledging the constraints across the borough, whether that be Greenbelt, AONB, or other landscape designations. Whilst there may be detractors of the approach we are taking, whether we like it or not, we must work within the rules. Past experiences of previous administrations have proved that maintaining a foolhardy, blinkered approach to plan making does not provide any protection or direction in the long run. It is clear from the outset that it would be an uphill and no doubt futile battle to convince an inspector that a partial update with an end date of 2032 would meet the requirements in the NPPF for strategic policies to look ahead over a minimum 15-year period. There would be a considerable risk in taking this approach, and this is supported by both the Planning Advisory Service and their consultants, who consider that the pitfalls of a partial update have probably been understated, and a comprehensive update is likely to be the only feasible approach. As pointed out in the report, it would be extremely difficult to limit or justify a partial update concentrating on housing supply matters only, given the wider implications of the local plan to the critical balance of our environment and other matters, including infrastructure, particularly our water and sewage infrastructure, which we know has suffered from a lack of investment and oversight. We owe it to our residents to plan properly and to use all the levers that are available to us to make sure that both our current and future residents and our environment can thrive. Although we are aware that our timescale for option A is ambitious, it is realistic and it is unlikely that we can do this any faster. Although if opportunities do arise, we will of course take advantage of them where we can and will seek to make the most of existing evidence and knowledge in relation to Local Plan Part 1 and Local Plan Part 2, where appropriate for producing a single plan for the borough. Our aim is to submit this plan for examination in summer 2026, which is much quicker than previous plans. We're also very aware that there is considerable uncertainty surrounding the adoption or possible abandonment of the government's planning reforms. We have therefore outlined in the report a twin-track approach, working initially with the current legislation, but with the ability to switch to a more streamlined approach for local plans set out in the reforms should the government announce this later next year. In line with the proposed changes, we will be producing, as I said before, a single plan. This will also help simplify plan making in the longer term and is required under the government's proposed planning reforms. As I mentioned, we will also use as much of the evidence base and policies in Local Plan Part 2 that we can, and we will of course work closely with our towns and parishes to achieve this aim. As a further contingency, we will also be updating our housing delivery action plan to identify the reasons for under-delivery of housing within Waverley and explore the ways to reduce the further risk of under-delivery over the forthcoming year, as well as setting out measures for improving the levels of housing delivery in the borough as a whole. To confirm again, the existing local plan continues to provide an up-to-date statutory development plan for Waverley, which must remain the starting point for decisions on planning applications while an update is brought forward. However, as we are only too aware with the overturn of the Planning Committee's decision on the Waverley Lane appeal, we remain a target to the inflexibility of the government's 5-year housing land supply, which tilts the balance away from local decision making. And this balance is threatened to tilt even further, as we are acutely aware, with activity in the UK housing market, which has weakened so far this year, driven by a number of factors, including the cost of living crisis, inflation, and spiralling mortgage interest rates. As an executive, I know that we are doing all we can within our limited powers to try and regain control of our housing requirements. And I hope that the executive can support the report and its recommendations this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I bring in Jerry, I wouldn't usually use such strong words as this, but I think it's fair to say that almost nobody here, and certainly a large portion of this council, do not agree with the government's rules on planning. Certainly not 100%, even if they disagree with some sections. That being said, considering the practice of this council over the last 20 years has bordered on the arrogant or naive in regards to the passing of local plans, I think it's entirely our duty to do this and do it properly, and to do anything else would fundamentally be a negligent act. So we really do have to do this in the way that's being proposed. There is really no other sensible option, frankly. Don't get me wrong, most of us would love to change the system, and we'd love them to actually pass the reforms that they're talking about in a timely fashion and in a reasonable way. But I don't think we can sit here and assume that based on the last 10 years or 13 years of the government in question. And Waverley Lane, I think it's fair to say that there will be some further challenge to both the stated decision and also the commentary from that particular inspector that will likely be following in due course. With that in mind, I shall now bring in Councillor Hyman on the Zoom.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, there's a very interesting decision based on a considerable amount of misinformation, I think, from the Compton Fields appeal decision, but that's for another place, I think, for us to argue that. I'm happy that the portfolio holder has said that we must work within the rules, and if I can refer back, please, to the February council meeting, minute 8916 of the council meeting. The council resolves, it says the council resolves that LPP1 requires updating and instructs officers to explore all options, including updating the plan immediately to make it broadly compliant with the latest MPPF, noting the housing numbers produced by the new standard methods as starting point only, and taking particular account of any habitats regulations, constraints on increase in housing numbers, followed by a more detailed update together of LPP1 and LPP together to produce a single local plan at a later date. And of course, that's what we decided. That's not what we're doing. Members were warned at the time that the idea of a minor change was not going to be an option. The process is the process. And therefore, the solution was that we do work within the rules, within the law, and conduct appropriate assessments. We still haven't been provided with an appropriate assessment because we never had one for LPP1 because it was adopted before the People Over Wind ruling, which was in April 2018. The local plan was adopted in February 2018, and we are going to need information from Natural England. So with our portfolio holder for planning presumably attending the Joint Strategic Partnership Board meeting tomorrow morning by Zoom, could we please, as her predecessor in the role as a representative on the JSPB, Councillor Martin Darcy had asked, Natural England at previous meetings had not been able to confirm they were unable to provide the information we needed to complete an appropriate assessment of the effectiveness of the Sang and Sam project. Would the portfolio holder please set down the baselines for us, or ensure that we are able to proceed with this by asking Natural England whether they are able to yet provide the necessary convincing evidence to the extent to which SANGS and the Strategic Access Management and Monitoring project, SAM, are demonstrably effective, and if not yet, then when they expect to be able to do so. So would the would the portfolio holder please confirm that she will ask tomorrow, Natural England, when they're going to be able to provide us with the information that we need to be able to justify not only a future iteration of the local plan, but our current local plan, which we're reliant upon. Thank you.
Thank you to Councillor Hyman. It's genuinely nice to be able to completely agree with you on one point. I think it's pretty perverse, frankly, the decision on the Waverley Lane decision, and not consistent with government policy in a number of particular ways, which we'll address separately. Unless Councillor Townsend is able to actually give Natural England the funding that it actually needs to do its job, I'm not sure she can guarantee anything. But Liz, would you like to comment?
Yes, I mean, obviously we've had a conversation at length before with Councillor Hyman about the appropriate assessment. And I can just assure Councillor Hyman that we will follow every statutory process that we need to do in the production of an update to the local plan. And I'm, as always, quite open to talking to him at any time if he wants to talk to me or all my officers about the appropriate assessment. Then, you know, we can do, as long as obviously it is a new question and not one that we have already answered in full to him. Thank you, Leader.
That's right. Thank you very much, everyone. Right, anyway, back to the debate on the actual item. Any further speakers on the item on the local plan? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. I read the recommendations of ONS with interest, and I very much agree with them on the point of affordable housing and the need, where possible, to prevent developers raising viability issues after permission has been given. I'd like to take the opportunity to express disagreement with the spirit behind point 2 of ONS's recommendations, which is a robust defense of a lower figure. And I think that does reflect a view which I've encountered more than once over the last few years, that less is good. And we managed somehow to simultaneously say that it's a terrible thing that there isn't enough housing available, especially for younger people and people on lower incomes, while simultaneously opposing any specific example of additional housing. And as we approach a general election, it is possible, without being too political about it, that we will have a government which is committed to expanding housing, possibly more than we would altogether like in some form. We'll have to see the proposals in detail, but I would urge that as we work on LPG 1, that we take into account the possible changes, of course, there, and that we don't take as a starting point that we want as few new houses as possible, but rather that we want the appropriate number of houses that ordinary people can afford.
I think it's probably worth me just saying at that point, other than the fact that I agree with you completely on the sentiment, as much as I suspect a new government will have a different tack on the subject of housing delivery, I suspect they also won't get round to it as quickly as we will need in order to deal with it within our own local plan review cycle. So we're likely to have to do this on the rules that we've got, however much we dislike them. And the standard method is entirely about numbers rather than about type. And the type of housing is something I think most of us here can probably agree should be different to the amount that is built and the type that is built, certainly in boroughs like ours. And that's probably where I would also argue against, for example, creating a large national park, which would heavily skew the type and ability of houses to be built. So Councillor Townsend is next.
Thank you. Thank you. I would just like to point out that we do have an affordable housing SPD, which was recently updated, and it does have quite clear information data required under viability for affordable housing. So I think that we hopefully are covered on that point. Should developers, try to reduce down the percentage of affordable housing within a development site. I would also say that, and agree with the leader, the standard method at the moment contains about a 90% uplift for affordability and is not based on objectively assessed need. So the affordability criteria is really, has not been seen to be working. It hasn't pushed down house prices at all. In fact, house prices locally have been maintained, and that is in some part due to the government's then approach to Greenbelt, which it continues to heavily protect. And I'm not saying that I disagree that it should be protected, but you cannot, in a borough like Waverley, which has had 76% approximately of constraints like Greenbelt, AONB, then continue to ignore those constraints within a housing allocation. So I think that we have to have a housing allocation that recognises the constraints within our landscape and within our environment as well. And I would also say that the government clings to the previous census figures and hasn't used the 2021 census figures, which shows a drop in households forming and therefore would affect our housing number. And I think we should be basing our housing number on the most up-to-date data. And I think it's very difficult to for residents to accept that we are putting forward a housing number based on a formula which hasn't been seen to address affordability issues and also isn't based on the latest projections of houses forming. So I think it is important that we do, look at the number and, as Councillor Palmer said, make sure that we have an appropriate number which is achievable, because otherwise we are in a continuous spiral of trying to meet a 5-year housing land supply, which is unachievable and which removes any decision making from the local community and puts it in the hands of the government inspector. Thank you.
And also just to reiterate the point that we have direct evidence of when Waverley was cavalier about those rules, even though they didn't like them, which is that they get to the inspector and the entire plan is just thrown out almost without any debate, a waste of huge amounts of officers' time, money and energy, with absolutely no positive objectives being achieved whatsoever. Any further comments? But I will in a second just go through the ONS points 1 to 4 to make sure we've got full comment on each. Councillor Merryweather.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I mean, it is a shame, isn't it, that the government seems to be either unwilling or unable to grasp even some of the basic fundamentals of the housing market in the country. And it's worth remembering that we're talking about the system for the granting of planning permissions, and the actual delivery of housing is so far disconnected from the number of planning permissions that are given that we end up in the mess that we find ourselves in. I agree with everyone who's spoken, particularly Councillor Palmer, in terms of the mix as well as the density and the tenure of housing that needs to be built. A national park, I understand, will on average increase house prices by 5%. And of course, we have that issue of viability, which is rearing its ugly head. And of course, there is a structural conflict in the system that as affordable housing is increased, eligibility for Cllr goes in precisely the opposite way. So we're unable to invest in the infrastructure that the proposed occupants of these houses so desperately need. The whole thing is a mess and not worth the paper it's written on.
Indeed, rather than infrastructure being proportional to the development, it is often in tension with it and not providing the sorts of infrastructure that we actually need to support what's being done. Any further speakers before we just go through the ONS recommendations to make sure we've covered those and before we go back to our own recommendations to council? Okay, if anybody disagrees with anything I'm saying on these as I go through them for ONS recommendations 1 to 4, well, part of that one recommendation, please do shout. So reinforcement of the importance of the development plan. I can't imagine anybody here needs to be told that the development plan is important, so I think we can probably agree with that one. A robust defence of the lower figure for using a local calculation, using a local calculation of local housing need. I think really the points Councillor Palmer's made there are the ones I'd like to see reflected. Councillor Merryweather.
I just like to comment on the use of the word robust. You can be as robust as you like. I can be offensively robust about absolute nonsense if I choose to be. Robust doesn't mean anything. It has to be evidence-based, and I think the direction of the comment coming from ONS totally misses the point.
Yes, Councillor Palmer.
Could I suggest that it would be appropriate if instead of the word lower, it said evidence-based?
So in the case of these, I think the comment from the executive is that I think we get the sentiment from which they're coming, but I think we would all like to see more of the right type of housing be delivered, and that actually the standard method and the fact that it doesn't really address the issue of type of housing, it only really deals with the number of, is at fault here. But again, just to reinforce, we are stuck in the system which the government set. And if we don't even vaguely try to follow it, we are likely to come a cropper. Liz.
I would just point out that the recommendations are on page 3 of your agenda, and whilst the wording that has been built into the recommendations of the ONS, but obviously is not exactly reflective, because there are certain words in there that are beyond our control. So as in, we have put the preparation of robust affordable housing policies, etc. So it's the sentiment is there, but obviously there are certain things that need to be realistically put within the local plan.
Don't get me wrong, I do believe the recommendations do address the substance of what ONS are getting at. I think for a new ONS, though, I just want to make sure that they have seen us go through all of their specific points so that they have been addressed and they know that they can raise them with us. 3, the housing figures and special strategy to be shared with neighbourhood plan groups at earliest convenience. I think that's a given. We try and share as much information with neighbourhood plan groups, towns and parishes as we possibly can, as soon as it's available. And then finally, robust policies about delivering affordable housing on approved schemes to mitigate developers bringing forward viability studies after approval has been given. Personal view is that the council does absolutely everything it can on this, but the system of bringing viability studies forward is absolutely obscene. And there's only so much we can actually do to fight that nonsense. It's about the only industry I can think of where you're able to guarantee that level of profit margin and that be not just acceptable, but actually guaranteed by government policy. I can't quite possibly think why that might be, though, can you? Right, in which case, moving back to the recommendations of the paper here, I am going to take them all as a block. Item 1 is a recommendation to council, but items 2 through 6 are the executive agreeing. As this is going to be the first one of these electronic votes tonight, just to remind everybody or tell everybody who's not had to go through this process before, there will be 3 buttons that will start flashing on your little panel in front of you. They are not for, against and abstain. In order, they are for, abstain and against. Abstain is in the middle. If we put this out at full council, we'll be putting some lovely labels on the buttons just to be absolutely sure. And the one change from the last time we did this process in council is that we are actually going to share the voting system onto the Zoom so the public can see the process as well, rather than just being us that can see it. So we give this first one a go, Fiona, and see if we can have a vote for, against or abstain on recommendations 1 through 6. And that's a nice clear 7 votes in favour, and there are 7 members here, so I think that's unanimous. Right, well, first one worked very nicely, so thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Fiona. Okay, moving then on to item 9, the Woolmer Hill playing pitch. This is with Councillor Williams to introduce.
Okay, thank you, Leader. This report's brought to executive to formally approve Waverley Borough Council to enter into a contract for the creation of the 3G pitch at Woolmer Hill. We've long recognised the need for such a pitch in Hazelmere in our council's playing pitch strategy, and the opportunity to deliver a 3G pitch at Woolmer Hill was seen as an opportunity too good to miss. And it has been accomplished according to the timescale and specification. As can be seen from the accompanying papers, Waverley Sill funding has been agreed. This is augmented by East Hants Sill and football clubs funding alongside the Football Foundation grant of nearly 700k. The pitch is really looking good. And as I've outlined, the project ran according to the timescale and within budget. Legally, the executive needs to formally approve the delegation to our executive head of commercial services to enter into the contract in order to close off the process. So I would formally move the paper that's before you and the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Got one registered speaker, which is Councillor Hyman on the Zoom.
Well, thank you again. Yes, I wasn't going to speak on this item because it looked sort of like normal and a an easy one. But I look at paragraph 8.1 on page 36, near the top of page 36, and it tells me that there was limited consultation on this specific item. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think that means none, and that we haven't heard of this. I would ask, is this the first that we've heard of this? But the approval of the project and process of contracting was shared with the executive in July 2022. I assume that means at a briefing rather than in public, because I didn't hear of that, but correct me if I'm wrong again on that. And I look at paragraph 11.5 on the next paragraph, not next page, page 37 at the very bottom. It says that it was completed on the 5th of June 2023. And then above you see that it's this is to regularize the current situation. Normally when I say regularize, I think that means we've got no choice. The question, because we've acted ultra vires, or we've acted without authority. And I'm wondering, is that? Can you clarify? Is that the situation that this has been done acting outside of our authority, whether accidentally or deliberately? I wouldn't expect the latter, but if we can have some clarification on that, is this just a case here that we are regularizing this because we've got no choice, a mistake was made? Members of the public looking at this will think, crikey, £1.25 million for a football pitch. What on earth are they wasting our public funds on? Why are they spending that much? And I was very pleased to see that actually we're not. The Football Foundation are funding this. Presumably they're used to paying this sort of money since prices have gone up. Everything's gone up, I know, but surely this was done before the worst of inflation. So I don't know. We're putting in, Waverley putting in £155,000 only of that, which is comforting. But 11.4 on the next page tells us the contract was so heavily amended from the standard form JCT, no party that was not directly involved in drafting it will be able to approve its content. It's therefore reliant on recommendations of MGAC to approve its term, and it does present a risk. We've got to pay the bill, I see. We pay that £1.255 million, and then we rely on the others paying. So the real important thing here, I think, for us to be certain of is that we can guarantee, we have guarantees that that money will be paid to us. So can we please be told whether we have absolute guarantees or what the risk is to us, and the risk that is referred to in 11.4. What really is the level of risk with simply agreeing this on the basis we've got no choice, we have to regularize it? Is there an option here if the risk is considered, when we know what the risks are? Is there an option for us to look at this further before we agree it? Thanks.
So Jerry, sorry, Councillor Hyman, one point. If you're not intending to speak on an item, please don't confuse me by registering to speak on it, because that is why I think you want to speak on it, because you've registered to speak on it. In terms of this, there are a number of issues that we've had over the past year or so that with the change of legal personnel in the council and a fresh pair of eyes looking at it, there's been a need to go back and check and redo some of the approvals or parts of the approvals on certain matters to make sure that they're done properly. Now, in the process of doing that, we now have a fuller and clearer process for approval going forward, but it is necessary to go out and, as you say, regularize these issues. In this case, it's fairly clear cut whether we can go back on it or not, because the building is already done. It's been done. This has been actioned. It's finished. And as you say, Waverley's component of this was £155,000 of SIL, and I distinctly remember being here discussing that particular SIL approval. And obviously, it went through the fairly not laborious, but certainly thorough process that the SIL board go through in making those recommendations. So from the point of view of the spend of Waverley SIL on the subject, and bear in mind we're talking about SIL here and not capital funding from Waverley itself, I am content that that has been through a full and proper process. I'm also content that as we move forward, these things are being dealt with under proper governance, and the number of these issues that we're having to regularize going forward are now finally starting to reduce. So from that point of view, the one question I can't answer, and I had a quick chat with the monitoring officer during your questions, I will subsequently check whether we have had the monies in from the other funders on the list, just to make sure that is done. I cannot categorically answer you now, so I'm going to just park that and get the chapter and verse offline, and I'll communicate that to you separately, Councillor Hyman. But other than that, I'm more confident now that we're starting to get to the last of these approval corrections going forward under the new legal and monitoring regime that we now have. Right, I'm going to open it up to other members of the executive, starting with Councillor Merryweather, then Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader. Actually, I think you made my point. Just to pick up on something Councillor Hyman said, looking at the table on page 10.2, anyone who's been to Wilmer Hill and seen the facility, I think will be impressed with it. It really is a fabulous facility. As far as I know, that's the going rate for something like that. No taxpayer money has been spent on this facility. It's come either from third parties like the Football Foundation or the football clubs. Waverley and East Hants have allocated SIL, which is developer infrastructure levy contributions. No taxpayer money has gone on these pitches, on this pitch.
And I think it's fair to say, in terms of just on the consultation point, this is definitely something that was wanted by the community, for sure. I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that, having had many discussions with people from that particular area and users of that particular site. Councillor Palmer.
Yes, just to agree with the point that the SIL committee does expect a substantial contribution to this kind of project from bodies like the Football Foundation, and where those have not been obtained, the SIL committee tends to take a sceptical view. In this particular case, we were satisfied that the overwhelming majority of the funding was coming from other sources, and we felt it was reasonable that Waverley should contribute from our own SIL fund.
Okay, any other speakers? Councillor Williams.
Yes, I'd just say I'd like to thank Councillor Hyman for raising the points that he has done. I think it's right and proper that we should have discussed this, and essentially, you know, we are regularizing the legal position of matters such as this going forward. And so far as this particular instance is concerned, we are talking about a job that needed to be done. It met the needs of the local community. It's something that where a good job has been done, and the community is better for it. So going forward, I think a good job has been done.
Okay, any other speakers before we go back to the lovely electronic vote system for another go? All good, Fiona? Yes? Wonderful. Right, in which case, if you all cast your votes when the system flashes up at you.
Leader, if I may point out, that's very difficult to read on a screen for people at home. The names underneath are extremely small.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Following the meeting here and its review through the Zoom and the YouTube, we'll be making amendments to the presentation of this if the software allows. We have to give it a go first time because right here in the chamber it's very clear, but I did expect it might be less clear on the Zoom. So
no, let me apologise because I've just gone to gallery to the speaker view and it is all much clearer.
Yeah,
so if that was told to people,
thank you, Jerry. Thanks, Jerry. Right, if everybody could cast their votes. Looks nicely unanimous. Excellent. Right, 2 for 2. Thank you, everybody.
That's perfect at home. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay, item 10, housing delivery building contract for Riverside Court. I think this is in a similar vein to the item preceding it. So, Councillor Palmer, I think you're introducing on behalf of Councillor Rivers.
Yes, thank you. The case here is uncontroversial in that it's a question of the delivery of 2 affordable homes, 2 one-bedroom flats, and this has already been approved by the council. So it's a question of the formality of approving the actual necessary works.
Okay, any further speakers on this one? It's a fairly straightforward matter, similar sorts of issues as the one previous, but fairly straightforward, I hope. Okay, if we could take this one to a vote. Thank you, everyone. This is going far better than I expected on the EV side. Thank you, Fiona.
Point of order, can I suggest that informally, when the meeting's over, we have a contested vote just to see whether the against and abstain also work?
See, now you've rumbled me. That's how I was going to do it at full council and just pretend the other buttons didn't work. But no, we have thoroughly tested it, Victoria and I and Fiona and Kim, in as we've gone through. So it's more a case of just checking that it was could be efficiently done during a meeting. And I'm sure Fiona will probably give me a more candid version of this afterwards. But okay, then moving on to item 11, the Broadwater Park changing rooms refurbishment work, which I'm very pleased to see come to executive this evening, is Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'm delighted that it is coming to executive this evening, and I don't believe it will be a controversial issue. We're proposing to secure executive approval for refurbishing and reconfiguring Broadwater Park changing rooms in Godalming. This is work which, again, I think is long overdue. I think the photographs that that members will have been provided with show this quite clearly. The need is recognised in the asset management plan for parks and countryside buildings. The changing rooms are currently unusable because of a major water leak. So in effect, the sooner the work is done, the better.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. So just before we move on to that item properly, I just wanted to update, as I have had an update from the project officer, Councillor Hyman, on the question that you had. We do have the money from the football clubs. The Football Foundation is on a grant basis, and we need to make the payments in advance and have made claims as such for the rest of the money. And East Hants is a claim process as well, though theirs has gone through a SIL process, so that should be a fairly straightforward setup. So that hopefully gives a little bit of an update, and we can follow up that in writing if we need to. Right, on to this particular item. I'm obviously thrilled to see this one come up because it deals with I've been in a few of these changing rooms, and this is probably the worst, I think, in the area. It's at the back of the Godalming Community Store, isn't it? And it's frankly in dire need of refurb and put back into proper use, certainly for the cricket club and also for a couple of the football clubs. So any other speakers on this item? Fantastic, in which case we'll take it to a vote. Fiona. Thank you very much, everybody. And as there is no need to exclude press or public, I can close the meeting at 18:54. Thank you all.